So, hello everyone, and welcome back to Fugitive Chefs. Today's conversation is one I was genuinely excited to have. It explores a side of chefhood I feel we don't often slow down and talk about. It's very unique. I feel we've not had somebody who's made such a pivot. Our guest today is Marisa Churchill. Marisa, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Furkan. I'm so excited to chat with you.
I'll just try to introduce you based on what I know about you. So, Marisa is a pastry chef who spent years in fine dining. She also competed in Top Chef on Food Network and then gradually stepped into a very different creative life. In this episode, we will talk about, I want to explore with you, Marisa, what competition culture looks like. I feel that's one side of kitchens most of us just watch on television, but don't really come to know how that goes on behind the scenes. I would like to see why kitchen life sometimes becomes harder to sustain as life changes, as we progress through our own lives, our personal lives, how that becomes not very compatible with kitchens at the pace they have, and how the skills that chefs build under pressure in kitchens can be translated into something completely different. In your case, it is writing fiction, which is why I said it's so different. And we will also get into tell what it means. That something you expressed when you wrote to me was that how the importance chefs have in telling a story, how different that perspective could be from writing, even if it's fiction. I feel the perspective you bring as a chef of lived experiences, how that takes a new form when you translate it all into this. So before we get into the episode, if anybody's listening, if this podcast resonates with you, if it has helped you so far, I would just ask you to follow it, drop a small comment, rate us on Apple or Spotify. All of this that you do, what it does is basically puts this podcast in front of other chefs who are possibly facing these same dilemmas and questions like you. So that takes a second, but it goes a long way. So Marisa, I'd love to start at the beginning. So before I ask about the TV shows or the books, I just want to know, what was your real first connection to cooking, or like cooking as a career? And when did it start to feel like a serious career?
Well, so first of all, I come from a long line of chefs. I'm half Greek, half German. My great-grandfather in Germany was a master chef who owned restaurants and hotels. On the Greek side of the family, my great-grandparents owned a pastry shop in Greece. And then my grandparents came to this country as immigrants and opened a restaurant. I was cooking with my grandmother in the kitchen from the time I was old enough to reach the stove. Truly, I was always there. We would go through the neighborhood, dig into, my grandmother would see dandelions growing in somebody's yard, which they're like, why is that weird old lady picking weeds from our kitchen? He was like, no, we're going to go and make these into a pot. And, I would picking olives too. We would always cure our own olives. There were tons of vats of olives in her garage that she would keep. So cooking was always a part of my family and our life, but I really kind of shied away from it in the beginning as a career path because I knew it was really hard. And I write about this. I sent you a link to it in the school library journal, an article that I wrote for them in their teen toolbox, kind of about the inspiration, where I really tried to follow that traditional path. And I went to university and I was studying marketing. And the longer I was there, I started to develop panic attacks because I knew this wasn't what I wanted to do. And the only time I would feel calm again was when I started cooking. And my mom was living outside of San Francisco at the time. And so she said, well, look, why don't you keep talking about this. Her friend Julie lived in the city. And she said, why don't we just go to the California Culinary Academy and, check it out. They have this beautiful Carem room. So the old California Culinary Academy was this old, beautiful building on Polk Street in San Francisco. And the Carem room was right in the entranceway, in just this massive dining hall with pillars. And it became the inspiration for the dining hall in my book, Secret Spells and Chocolate.
Oh, wow.
So as soon as I walked in there, I thought I knew, everything in me just came alive. And I just thought, this is it. I have to do this. So within 6 months, I left university and enrolled at the California Culinary Academy, and I never looked back. So,
oh, wow. That's super interesting, because for me, as you said, you come from a line of chefs and come from people from a family that knows culinary career, which is what possibly set this idea into your head also that, it's going to be, which is very real, it's going to be a challenging career. But how was the approach of you as a generation where culinary education was accessible? I do not know if the ones in your family before you who were into culinary field as an industry to work in, did they get formal education, or what was their view on this new approach to entering kitchens?
No, they didn't really have, they were supportive just because they knew I'd been struggling.
Right.
So they didn't have any kind of opinion about the culinary school versus kind of learning it the old fashioned way through, just going and staging in kitchens or working as an apprentice somewhere. But yeah, for me, it was just amazing. And I made friends that I still have to this day. It was an incredible experience. But the funny thing for me is I really grew up cooking. I spent a lot more time cooking than I did baking, but I knew I wanted to specialize in baking and pastry. I knew that's what I wanted to do, which was a different degree that I was choosing. And I thought it was this really the right choice. But I'm so glad that I did that because it really was the correct decision for me. Um,
Definitely.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it's just I be baking and pastry. Just it's. I feel like it's the most magical part of the food world, and so that's why I really gravitated towards it.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you say. I mean, from my own personal experience, the reason, I mean, for me, it's the other way around. I got into it for baking and pastry and ended up not doing it ever because of the, I don't know. For me, as a chef, it felt like when you're cooking stuff in a pot, you can just put stuff thing in the pot and keep changing things as you go. Whereas in baking and pastry, more or less, you can try doing that, but once things go into the oven or whatever tool gadget you're using, it's basically out of control. There's a lot of calculation, mathematics, a lot of details to it, which didn't attract me. And I guess that's what got you interested into the details and the finer things, which pastry has more room for, I guess.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look. I mean, I can start to get super geeky about it all. Well, with chocolate and sugar, you can and you can manipulate things. Just it takes some time to learn how to do it, and so that's kind of a fun thing to tackle too. Is as you become more knowledgeable with baking and pastry, you can tweak things. But you're right; it is so much more unforgiving, and there's so many rules. I mean, just for this book, so we are going to be diving into my novel Secret Spells in Chocolate, which was inspired by my experiences. It's about magical cooking competition. It was inspired by my experiences on Top Chef and Food Network. And so, of course, my brain going all crazy with it. Was like, okay, I have got to make chocolates for this book. And so I have been tempering a massive amount of chocolate in my house the past 6 months. And that's, again, one of those things where the house, I mean, opening windows, checking thermometers, making sure that the house is staying around 69 degrees, which I hate a cold house, by the way. So that has been torture for me. But, wait, I don't have a cooling tunnel. Okay, so let's clear out a space in the fridge and kind of create a cooling tunnel in there. So there are all sorts of things like that where, like I said, you can have your workarounds and it is kind of fun and rewarding to come up with those, but it can be unforgiving. I mean, I did have some batches of chocolate that didn't temper properly because the temperature was off slightly. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know about chocolate tempering, you're off by a degree or two. That's it. That's your margin of error right there. It's very unforgiving. Luckily, Valrhona was very supportive. So they gave me about 25 pounds of chocolate. So I had a little bit to play with without being too painfully financially, but it was still a little rough going.
How cool is that? I mean, and how did, like, I mean, one thing is you sign up to a course where you're learning this as a course curriculum, but how was the transition to the careers into, like, what were your first kind of jobs that you had after coming out of the academy, and what was it like? Was it restaurant jobs? Was it working for small patisseries, or where did
No,
are you
for me, I always gravitated towards restaurants. I love restaurants. And it's this too. Restaurant work is so different than the other areas. And I feel like as a pastry chef, you do have more ability. Like if you're a chef, where are you going to go? You're going to go to a restaurant. And it was likely, but what kind? Is it going to be fine dining? Is it going to be fast casual? But as a pastry chef, do you want to be a chocolatier? Do you want to work in a bakery? Do you want to work in restaurants? So my first job was at Rubicon. I'm totally dating myself here, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, it was the happening place in San Francisco. It was such a cool, fun place to work. It birthed so many now famous chefs, everybody from Chris Constantino to Tracy Desjardins, Elizabeth Faulkner. It was owned by Robin Williams, Robert De Niro, and Francis Ford Coppola. It was down in the financial district in San Francisco. We had an amazing wine program that was Larry Stone, who's a master sommelier, was our head sommelier there. So also all sorts of well-known sommeliers came out of there, from Raj Parr to Alan Murray. So yeah, it was just a really cool place to work. And we were already playing with unusual ingredients, and everything from candy cap mushrooms to making roasted corn ice cream, which these days they think, okay, that's, pretty standard. But back in 2000,
ahead of its time?
that was 25 years ago. People weren't doing that. Uh, I still remember one time we were working on a roasted corn ice cream, and one of the servers came in and they're like, "What the hell are you guys doing? Poured an ice cream?"
Yeah. And Marisa, just because I mean, we are talking about your career, we want to talk about your book and how you make this transition. For me, it's important to understand when you look back at yourself and those contacts that you've said you're still in touch with these people who stayed with you in that career. How would you say describe yourself as a chef in those years? For me to understand what kind of a chef is somebody like Marisa who would make this transition, and those who don't, and those who would say grow the ranks, open their own restaurant, and take that very typical path. So, what makes you take this very atypical path and get into, say, the Top Chef journey, the restaurant, the book itself? So, how would you describe yourself as a chef back in the day?
It's God, how would I describe myself? I mean, I was very adventurous, always. I've always been a risk taker. I've always been, if everybody's going on that path, I will intentionally go on this path over here. Um, but it also just came about in some ways naturally, but also in some ways kind of by accident. After Rubicon, I started working at the Slanted Door, which was building up a big name. And then from there, I went on to Lulu, and Lulu was my first executive pastry chef job, and Lulu had just, Jody Denton had left and Jared Dube had taken over. And so if you work in the restaurant industry, when restaurants get a new chef, if it's a well-known restaurant, you're going to get reviewed. And again, I mean, this is kind of something that inspired the little aspects of the book as well, is you want to see a chef sweat. I don't know how it was at Noma and some of the restaurants that you worked at, but at Rubicon, we had the list of fake names that would stay at the host stand. We had photos of Michael Bauer, who was then the head food critic for the San Francisco Chronicle, and then he later became an inspector for the Michelin Guide. But we had all those fake photos in there, everything. And getting a review from a big critic can make or break your career. So I was nervous. Honestly, I've always been this way about my work. I cringe when chefs are like, you've got to taste this dish. It's the most amazing dish ever. Because in my head, I'm like, is it really? If you're saying that, it probably isn't. Right? You should be your worst critic. So yeah, so I'm always looking at whether it's my writing or cooking and looking for those flaws and looking for the things that I can improve. So I really didn't know how it was going to go, but it ended up going really. And then from there, I got my own San Francisco Chronicle feature. So then some TV things started. And from there, people who knew me I was on Top Chef season 2. So it was very early on. This was 2006. But Top Chef season 1 was filmed in San Francisco. With several people that I knew, I didn't even know the show at that point, but would come and be like, dude, I just saw this show. You should try out for this show. You would be great on this show. So after I heard it a couple of times, I thought, what is this show? And so I watched an episode. And one of the things that stuck out from season 1 was multiple challenges. These chefs were looking at each other going, this is a pastry challenge. I'm not a pastry chef. We're not pastry chefs. We don't know what's going on. And I think ding, ding, ding. So I liked it too, just from that. I knew nothing about reality cooking. I kind of liken it now to selling my soul to the devil. It was Top Chef it's, look, you sign a contract that says that but they show may not be truthful or display you in a fair or flattering light. It was still a great experience that opened up the door to Food Network and all sorts of other things. But, I went into that like, sure, 20-something, I'm going to sign this. It'll be fun. Having really no clue what I was getting myself into. Yeah. When they started doing Top Chef Just Desserts, they called me back. They're like, do you want to come on this show? And I was already doing stuff at Food Network. I'm like, you know what? I think no, good. Scott.
Super, super cool what you just said, and this is where I was going to lead to as well, because I want to explore this part of your career. And we've all heard about what you just mentioned about how not real these experiences are and how it is, a lot of it is staged. But I also want to get the more positives of it, because we also had Imran on our show, who's also from Top Chef Canada, and he shared some of these stories of how things work. Not knowing what you want from these shows can crush you the way you come out of it or the way you enter it. What aspects do you think, and I would not say just Top Chef, but what sort of reward do these kind of this sort of a fame of being on the television brings that can be beneficial to somebody who's looking for that as a pivot? So like, what are the positives that you think stay today and that you would like to highlight for anybody thinking of that as a pivot out of restaurants?
Gosh, I mean, first of all, it's changed a lot. I mean, like I said, when I went into it, it was season 2. It was so new. So I think that nowadays there's a lot more that you can glean from it because there are more pivots. There are more chefs that have had that experience that you can talk to. I also know that the show's changed a little bit. Like when we were on there, we had to give our phones away. We were not allowed to have any communication with the outside world, family, friends, nothing. You couldn't check the internet. And I just know from talking to chefs that have been on it more recently, that has changed. They are able to keep their phones now. There's a little bit more of that connection. But, look, they say there's no such thing as bad publicity. And I think
Love.
that is really true. And so, you just, if you want to do something like that, go for it. And I think you just have to keep an open mind and not be certain that it's going to get you from point A to point B. It might get you from point A to point Z or somewhere in between.
Mm-hmm.
You really have no idea where it will land, but it is an opportunity, and it's an opportunity for you to get your name out there in a different way. Yeah. If you're looking for a pivot, it can definitely provide one.
And Marisa, looking at stepping into this and then after, how would you say has this sort of visibility shifted that impact of visibility to understand success or validation? Because many a times these things are distorted, not just with TV shows, but somebody, for example, say somebody who works at a Michelin-starred restaurant doesn't really promise they're very talented. It could be the other way around. So how has visibility somehow affected your way of understanding success or validation, if it comes to that?
I mean, gosh, it's so different too. I mean, for example, Food Network is totally different than Top Chef. Like the Food Network, it's very much what you see is what you get, because it's a different format. What they're selling as a show is different. You're not living together. It's less about kind of reality TV drama and more about cooking, and it's still high stakes, but it's different. So, so I don't really watch Top Chef anymore for that reason, because there were some things for me that were really challenging. I mean, for example, there was an episode where, well, I won't get into all of it, but let's just say that the chefs called me ahead of time and they're like, did you see what happened tonight? It's messed up. Don't watch what they did, because you could really twist things. So, I never look at shows now and think this is exactly what happened. Now I tend to look at it more and think that this is what happened on Food Network, just because that was my experience on it. And to be fair, I think everybody has a different experience. I don't think that everybody you talk to at that was on Top Chef would have the same experience I did. And likewise, the same with Food Network. But I do think that I'm less suspicious of, is it really this way? Was it really this way? If I'm watching something on Food Network versus another show. And it's not even just Top Chef. I mean, even, for example, Project Runway, I used to watch a million years ago, but it was the same production company and it was also on Bravo. It's one of those things where it was an entertaining show. It was a great show, but I just thought, is it really? And that's a tricky thing too, because with food, it's like with Project Runway, you could look at an outfit and you could see it. Where food, you have the visual, but the visual is only part of it. You have no way to reach into the television and taste, and like, what are the judges tasting here? What is really happening?
Definitely, yeah. I mean that's one layer. I think that's the role of production houses and the way they make these things. That they're doing a good job. If you're like forgetting all these layers, that's kudos to them. But again, it's very important to remember all these layers too. Yeah, people like you who have been on the other side of it are the ones who can possibly give this kind of introspection, because I feel a lot of people I've spoken to through the podcast and those in the community look at these. Like I have friends in the past career who have been offered one of them on Top Chef France, for example, and it can destroy your career if you don't really understand what is it that you want out of it and what it will take of you. And if you know that if that fits it, if that balance fits positively for you, I think it's a great opportunity to be in front of a million screens and then use that in the future. But moving on from that, Marisa, because in the beginning you spoke about how you entered culinary career in the California Academy you mentioned, and then getting into restaurants. But when did it happen that you shifted your focus from working or your interest from working in full-time restaurants to consulting, media, and eventually writing? So how does that happen? Is it just a matter of chance, or did you want this kind of a transition because it fits possibly the life that you wanted to build for yourself?
No, it was something that I wanted. So it was about 2009. So it was 3 years after Top Chef. Part of it was just the finances of it. At that point, I was still single. Anybody who has worked in restaurants knows that you get into this as a labor of love, not because you're looking to make a bunch of money. And so that was one of the challenges for me too, is just kind of, how do I live in the Bay Area, especially, it's Silicon Valley, a lot of tech companies, prices are high because a lot of people here can afford it. And I wasn't making enough money in restaurants. So I started consulting. And at first I started consulting just for restaurants and helping them with menu development, doing a couple at a time, which kind of gave me not only more flexible schedule, but allowed me to do more. But then I started working for some companies as well. And then I realized there's more money in working and developing for companies than there is in restaurants. And then in 2010, that's when I got my first cookbook deal. So that kind of that was kind of a big pivot for me. And then I moved to Greece and I lived there for 5 years, and then everything changed. I mean, that was a dream of mine for a long time. I did not plan on staying in Greece for 5 years. It was kind of, I got my book advance, and it was, my first book was with Random House. It was a nice advance. And I thought, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to live this dream, and I'm going to move to Greece for a year. I ended up having my own cooking show in Greece. I ended up doing some consulting for some food companies over there. And a year turned into 5 years, which was, yeah, such a cool, such amazing experience. That, one of the things that I miss about it too is just the proximity to everything else. I mean, here, don't get me wrong, America, it's great. I could take my kids to Disneyland for a weekend, but it's so much cooler. You're like, cool, what do I want to do? Let me fly to Rome for a weekend. It's only an hour and a half away. Yeah. Let me go to Copenhagen and check out Noma, which is, yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, and when you speak about these things, at that point when you were going through this transition, for now you're reflecting back and seeing all the good that came out of it. But at that moment of doing this transition, because a lot of people who listen to this podcast are people who are making these transitions, people who are possibly hosting their first supper club or signing up their first consultancy contract. What did it feel like? What I hear from most of the people in the industry is that, as you mentioned, with the changing the restaurant, the Michelin inspectors, all the pressure around food writers, we give a lot of importance. And I mean, I understand it could make or break someone's career and business. And we're in this bubble where a lot of things look much more important than they look for the rest of the world. And then leaving that and going into something which is more like consulting a company or a food business, does it feel like giving up? Is it like creating space for something else? How is that initial transition? Because you also know that once you leave restaurants, it'll be very difficult to get back into it once you get used to the different pace of life, which is not as restaurant chefs live,
Yeah, it is. I mean, for me, it felt exciting. I was ready. It also felt scary because there was no guarantee. I mean, it was scary. And because at that point too, I was pretty well known in San Francisco. And I thought, I'm leaving all of this behind. I'm going someplace else. You come back, you can be irrelevant. I mean, there's a lot of things. So it was scary, but it was also really exciting. I mean, again, I think it goes back to, if we're working in restaurants, we're kind of adrenaline junkies to a bit of an extent. So we're looking for those highs. We're looking for those bits of excitement. And so this for me felt exciting, and it also just felt right. And it did end up being the right move for me. I mean, I had so many amazing experiences living in Greece. I also wrote another cookbook when I was in Greece. And like I said, I had my own cooking show. So it was really cool getting to pivot in that way. But I do still miss working in restaurants to this day. I miss it. It's funny. A friend of mine who I used to work with, he opened up a restaurant that's in our area, and I love his restaurant. First of all, it's amazing. It's called Ethel's Fancy. So if anybody's in the Bay Area and wants to check out Ethel's Fancy, Scott worked at French Laundry. He worked at Daniel in New York. He's amazing. And so it's funny because we've talked about, well, maybe I should do something for one night. We kind of have discussed, he's like, yeah, I'd love to do that. And, I kind of have discussed it under the guise of promoting the book, but really it has very little to do with promoting the book. I would just kind of love to get back in there for a night.
No, totally. I
need to do it, right?
I mean, it's as addictive as it is. It breaks you, but again, at the same time, it's so addictive. And it's also, I think the addiction also comes from the camaraderie, the fact that you mentioned to cook with somebody, and both of us being under the same pressure, the whole team being under it. I feel it's sort of, this company makes it kind of bearable to an extent where it's enjoyable to have that pressure and work under it.
Yeah. It's so funny because camaraderie and also competitiveness became kind of a central theme in my novel. But it was also, when you sent me the questions ahead of time, you asked a question in there that we started to touch on, but then we kind of walked away from, and nobody's asked me in that way before. And I so loved it. It was, what did cooking competitions give you, but also what did they take away? And it goes back to that. When you are in a restaurant, there is such a sense of camaraderie. I mean, those are your brothers, those are your sisters. You're doing your prep work. You guys are joking around. You're having a good time. If somebody's in the weeds, they've got a problem during the shift, other people will jump in there to help. You always want to have all of your stuff prepped. You want to be doing the best job that you can, because it's not just about you, it's about your entire team. I mean, if somebody screws up, the whole ship can go down in a kitchen. I mean, it really works like that. And when dinner service is over, most of the time you guys are kind of hanging out. We're going out for a drink together or something, unwinding together, because after that kind of, adrenaline rush, you're not going home and you're not crashing right away. I mean, it takes a while to unwind. So going from that to looking at these other chefs as, you're my friend, but you're also, I don't know if enemy is quite the right word, but you're my competitor. You're what stands between me and what I want. It's hard. It's looking at it in a completely different way because teamwork is so critical in the restaurant. I mean, you could look at other areas, but unless you're looking at, say, the medical field or something where somebody's on an operating table, you're not going to feel the derailment so brutally. I mean, if you're working in a corporate culture or something, but in the restaurant, you're going to feel it. You're going to see it on the plate and it's going to happen like that. So kind of being able to switch and pivot like that and kind of going up against the other chefs and sizing them up instead of being like, hey, this is my teammate and, come, we're helping each other out. It's a shift. Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, coming from that, what you just mentioned, the shift, the bigger shift I see in your career, for example, before we come to the current novel that you just come out, I would love to hear more about it. But before that, you were more into cookbooks. Like the first books you wrote were cookbooks. And writing, I feel it's so solitary. A job of writing, at the end, you have a publishing house, you have people proofreading for you, telling you putting a structure to it. But it's a very solitary job in that case. And how did you first get to it? Was it publishers approaching you, or what is the way? Because a lot of us do not know. I mean, there are chefs who are not trained for this, but possibly they have stories like yours to share. What is I don't know. I think there is no one solution solves everything, but what is a basic way that worked for you to get into this cookbook business, call it?
So first of all, cookbooks are so different. I liken writing a cookbook to planting a tree and writing a novel to birthing a baby. So, for you guys out there, let me tell you, birthing the baby is a lot harder than planting the tree.
Can you imagine?
So first of all, for example, a cookbook. So I had an idea for my cookbook, my first cookbook, and one of my friends, Laura Werlin, who's a James Beard Award-winning author of wine and cheese books, a PR friend introduced us and said, oh my gosh, you should meet Laura. She's a big fan of Top Chef. We connected. I mentioned to Laura I had an idea for a book. Laura's no problem. I'll connect you with my agent. Fast forward X number of years, I was talking to another chef friend. I was looking for a new agent. Same thing. No problem. Let me connect you with my agent. So writing a cookbook is actually pretty easy. All you have to do is know somebody who's done it and they can probably connect you with an agent. You basically have to write a proposal, and that's it. You give the agent the proposal. The agent will decide if they're interested or not. Writing a novel is brutal. First of all, even if you do know somebody who's written a novel, there's not much they can do to help you, because unless you are already famous, like a big famous novelist, and then you wouldn't need that help. Nobody is going to look at your book unless you have the entire thing done and they know that it's good and they know that you can write something well from start to finish. So before you even go looking for an agent, you have to write the entire novel. Yeah. And then for me, especially because this was in the kidlet area, it was a lot. Most of the time, agents that are representing cookbooks aren't representing kidlet. It's not always the case, but most of the time, which means you're looking for a new agent and you're looking for somebody that specializes in kidlet. So it was like a process of just cold queries, sending out emails, hunting people online. So it was very, very different than writing cookbooks, and even the process of going about it. It can be done. I'm proof that it can be done.
Of course.
But if you're out there and you're thinking about, dude, should I write a cookbook or should I write a kid's book? Maybe start the cookbook.
Definitely. I mean, let's talk about it. Tell us about Secret Spells in Chocolate. I'm going to put a link down in the description. You sent a very beautiful article. I enjoyed reading through it, but not, even more than that, like seeing all your pictures through your school time, how that was. So tell us about the novel. It's from what I see, it's deeply rooted in real kitchen, but again, it's fiction, but it's in real kitchen culture. So yeah, tell us about it.
So here is my baby right here, Secret Spells and Chocolate. And
it's a beautiful cover, Marisa.
Thank you so much. And then my older daughter discovered this. They didn't tell me they were going to do this, but they actually printed on the whole cover, which I so love.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So this is
nice.
Anyway. So yeah, so this is my baby. And it is very much rooted in realities. How did this come about? So I was reading Knives at Dawn, America's Quest for Culinary Glory at the Bookus Door. If anybody has not read that book, I highly recommend it. It's by Andrew Friedman, who is one of my favorite nonfiction authors. He focuses heavily on chefs. And I feel like for your audience, I probably don't need to explain what the Bocuse d'Or is, but just in case, the Bocuse d'Or is the culinary competition that happens in Lyon every other year. And on the off years, it's the Coupe du Monde de la Patisserie, which is the world, aka the World Pastry Cup. And as I was reading Knives at Dawn, there was so much in the book that brought me back to Top Chef and Food Network. And I realized that whether you're looking at a reality TV show or you're looking at the top competition in the world between the greatest chefs in the world, where they're training 2 years to get to that point, there's still this kind of the same themes threaded through, where there are those moments of self-doubt or those moments of, I wish I would have done this differently. There are questions too, that when we go back to the whole thing of camaraderie versus rivalry, where certain things will happen and you're wondering, did this happen intentionally? Did somebody do this intentionally to my ingredients that you would not ever think of if you were just in a kitchen? So as I started thinking about all of that, I thought, oh my God, there's a story here. And especially when I then thought about the Coupe du Monde de la Patisserie and some of the other, countries. So basically, Knives at Dawn is really about America wanting to finally become viable in the Bocuse d'Or. And then looking at the Coupe du Monde and seeing that, Team Australia and some of these other countries had gone through similar things where they really wanted to become contenders, and everything that happens and everything these chefs go through. So as I started thinking about this and feeling like there was a story there, again, kind of just tapping into it, just really sparked something in me, because again, that pastry background, I think most chefs in general, especially if you come from a fine dining background anyway, you are highly artistic, because when you're in fine dining, it's all about creating something different and a new and memorable experience. It's not just the cooking. So for me, it was really like this idea of, I get to do something so highly creative in the world of food again. And then when I started to think about it and think, okay, what would this look like? I wanted to see what was already out on the market. And when I looked, that made me even more determined. I still remember I opened up a book. I'm not going to say which book, but it was a well-known book that has been successful.
Okay.
And it had a magic and cooking angle. And I'm looking at this, and they're making some magic cookies, and they're using a bag of chocolate chips from the store.
Okay.
Yeah, I know exactly. Okay. And as a chef, I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, so they replace part of the cocoa butter with wax, usually, or an oil, which is that's how they hold their shape. And this is why, chefs, when we're making cookies, we're chopping up couverture, because we want all that flavor, because chocolate has a ton of terroir. It tells a story just like wine. And so I was looking at that and I was going, oh my God, there's such a missed opportunity here. And as I started looking through more things, I just thought, these people are missing not only the aspects of the food and the ingredients, but what it's like to be a chef, what it really feels like in the kitchen. And I thought, of course they're missing it, because you really you'll never know it truly unless you've lived it.
100%.
So so that's kind of what I started out with. And it was really, writing it kind of in some ways felt like a therapy session.
No, I can imagine. I mean, it sounds like it sounds very much like, I mean, again, people have done it before, but not with this angle. And that's what you mentioned in your email, and what you've just mentioned, that you've added this, the kitchen reality or the chef's reality, this perspective, I think is very important, because if not, you miss out and make up so many things which could be, misaligned. But talking about, how did your training as a chef show up in this, Marisa? Because I think every person, if you give somebody to solve a puzzle, everybody approaches a different way. And I feel that in kitchens, for example, I think many problems I approach in my company today with food research, studying the anthropological part of food, I do it very much fast-paced, not as systematic, for example, as my colleagues who are technologists who work with Excels and sheets, whereas I say, you know what can I do quickest first, and then we'll see how to get there later or how to replicate it. So as somebody who's an author but a chef before that, what part of your kitchen career shapes the way you write today?
Well, as you know, we pastry chefs have a specific reputation in the kitchen. We are not known as having the best knife skills in the kitchen, but we are known as being the most organized.
Definitely, 100%.
So the discipline that was required, the organizing of my thoughts, the outlining, which outlining is not fun. I really don't like the outlining process, and I don't think most writers do. But getting those thoughts and then trying to put them all into a cohesive pattern to see not just where, because you have your overall plot, but then you have all these subplots. And, I kind of liken the subplots to, if you're building a wedding cake or you're building a plated dessert, you're putting in those layers of not just flavor, but texture, color. Everything has to be in there. And so it's really kind of like that too when you're working with subplots. You're layering things in and you're putting them in a specific pattern for a specific reason, whether it's because you like how it looks aesthetically or you want something to break open in a certain way. I mean, kind of looking at it like that. I really tapped into kind of the pastry chef discipline when writing. And then again, I think just the creativity as well. I would look at something, I mean, so for example, this won't really give too much away, but when I was going through dishes, because 99% of the ingredients that are in the book are real ingredients. The recipes are real. So I wanted also there to be recipes that maybe your average person hadn't heard of. And so one of them I was looking at and I was thinking about rumbledy thumps. Okay.
Hmm.
And, rumbledy thumps, I mean, unless you're British or Scottish, you're probably not eating a lot of rumbledy thumps, but it's kind of like a casserole with potatoes and cabbage. But me, my pastry chef head, I'm hearing this and I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking about the oven. And I'm just like rumbledy thumps, thump, 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 boom. And I kind of started picturing this oven trembling and shaking and then the oven door flying open and there's like a little portal there instead of a proper oven. And I thought, okay, this is fun. I thought, yes, traveling by rumbledy thumps, because yes, we're not going to just be traveling by boring old airplanes and there's got to be cooler ways to get around and why not
Sure.
food recipe. So yeah, so again, with pastry, you're always kind of imagining and coming up with weird things, especially again, that fine dining background. It's like, that's like the little cherry on top at the end of the meal. So it really has to, and especially back when I went to culinary school. I mean, back then, I mean, it was still the world of, pâte à choux and, sugar cages. So it was, really kind of just thinking about how to bring out the magic of food and especially baking and pastry.
Into writing. Yeah. I mean, and for me, what sticks out is what you just explained about how to come up with this idea. I feel what pastry chefs do very well is because there is a lot of, I think it's much more complicated to reach the end result of the recipe in your mind. I feel pastry chefs have this capacity to kind of put an image to it in your head or sketch it out. I feel how to reach those ends, and without having to do a lot of A/B testing, you get there and you kind of cancel out some ideas pretty early on when you're coming up with desserts. There's a lot of expensive ingredients involved in any restaurant, be it a fine dining or not. So I feel that is again one more skill which I think as an author, it can like make the process lengthy or not based on how good you're at this imagining part of what the reader what emotions they could feel when they are approaching this book. So yeah, super interesting. It's very interesting for me because when I talk to all these chefs who are planning these pivots in the community, I feel a lot of them do not value if how much that you've learned is not a waste, because a lot of people feel that if I make this pivot, I'm gonna waste all the time I've spent building myself as a career, as a chef in this career. And I always tell to them that there's so much from it that you do not put value to today, but when you get out of it, and so the gigs you did, the TV show in Greece or consulting food companies, there's so much of knowledge that comes as being a chef in restaurants that's definitely useful. And for you, Marisa, making that into a question, what part of being a chef would you say is something that is very difficult to leave on? So of course, there are parts of it that you change to become the new role that you've taken upon, but which parts of it you think are the last ones that you could give up on when you go into these new careers?
Oh gosh, I mean, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, it is that feeling that you get in the kitchen, because it is something that is so special and it is so unique to the kitchen, because I have done a little bakery work and some other things, but because of the intensity in restaurant kitchens, I love that feeling and I miss that feeling and I do crave it in my life in other ways. I mean, I like pushing myself at the gym and I used to swim competitively and I like to still kind of push myself in the pool just to kind of get that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
But also the feedback.
Right.
When you're working on a new dish, you're not just making a dish on your own and then you're like, hey, I've got a new dish. Other chefs are tasting it. Other chefs are giving you their opinion. And, some of the best desserts I put out were when I got feedback from other people. I still remember there was one dish, and it's still probably one of my favorite dishes. It was this frozen yogurt semifreddo, and it was in a papaya soup, and it had a black sesame Florentine cookie on top of it. The herbs weren't right. I was trying to get some herbs and I was playing with basil and mint, and we were tasting it and trying to figure out what wasn't working. I mean, it was close, but it just wasn't quite there. And one of the other chefs was like, why not try shiso? Have you tried shiso?
Okay.
And I was like, oh my God. And that little thing transformed it. And and after that, it was really solid. I mean, the papaya and the shiso and then the tanginess and creaminess of the yogurt semifredo, it worked beautifully. And, so that's something that I value so much, is getting feedback, whether it's as a writer or cooking. I mean, and when I was having some of the chocolate issues, I noticed one of my former assistants is now a chocolatier. So that was one of the first things I did. I called her and I said, hey, I'm having some issues. I don't have a cooling tunnel in my house. Give me some ideas. So working with things like that. And, writing, it's the same thing. So when you're writing, it is solitary. You're in a different world. Leave me alone. Don't talk to me. But you get feedback there too. I mean, your agent goes over things first and gives you feedback. Then your editor does. And I actually love that, because every round of edits I do and every bit of feedback, the manuscript comes back stronger. So
Yeah.
I try to hold on to that, because to me, it's just like being in the kitchen and getting that feedback and trying to be the best chef you possibly can be and produce the best dishes you can produce.
Yeah, great. I mean, I think it's a beautiful way to look at it, because I think that's one thing when we transition out of this career, because I think even if it's not your colleagues, which is something very important, as you said, running these ideas through your chefs or getting the taste that. But I think food is so easy to understand if somebody likes it or not, for whatever reason that may be. Because again, it's a very lived experience. You give it to your guest, you see what comes out from the plate waste, or what you see how people react to it. So I think it's important to keep this kind of a feedback loop into the new careers you take upon and how you can make systems for them. I would like to thank you for this conversation. Thank you for telling to us your story and to show how the idea of Chefhood expands and what it can look like, not just for cooking for guests, then into the TV show that you've done, the cooking shows you've done, the books you've done, and then finally shaping how food has been imagined, written about, and even remembered. I think a lot of it is legacy in the end when it comes to writing, and I think this representation you've showed of how a chefhood can be useful for that. I mean, it's beautiful. So thank you so much for that. And I mean, I would like you to now share towards the end anything that you would think that somebody who's in this dilemma of, I have these talents that don't have their place in a restaurant and they want to pivot to something else. Maybe it's writing, maybe it's something else. What is it that's something you would like to tell them?
You know what? Somebody said something to me and it was really powerful, because I used to say, oh yeah, I used to be a pastry chef, and we are talking about that and talking about the transition. And he looked at me, he's like, you're still a chef. He's like, just because you don't work in a restaurant anymore doesn't mean you're not a chef. He's like, you went to school, you just put in the time, you put in the work, you're still a chef. And so I would say that just because you choose to pivot doesn't change who you are or the fact that you're a chef. And it may surprise you the ways that you discover that you use all that and are able to pivot and put that into use in a different way. Just because you're not cooking on the line 10, 12 hours a day anymore doesn't mean you're not a chef anymore. You are. You're just using it in a different way.
That's so powerful. And it's the whole idea of the podcast. So yeah, thanks so much for coming on, Marisa.
Thanks for having me.
We will link your book, the book Secret Spells in Chocolate, and all your work in the show comments. And for those listening, if something in this episode resonated, I would love to genuinely hear it. Leave a comment or even rate us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And even one line I feel helps other chefs who have these ideas to find this podcast. So following or rating show is one of the simplest ways to support this project. And this has been Fugitive Chefs. Thanks for listening.